Hi and welcome. I'm John Jeffries from Partners in Ministry. For the last 35 years, my wife Alison and I have led a small group from our church that has met in our home every week for a meal for 35 years. It's been the most amazing, wonderful experience for us. We have got to know the most incredible group of people and journeyed with them on their faith journey over this time. We've laughed together, we've shared meals together, we've cried together. Some of them have become Christians for the first time. Some of them have re-engaged with their faith for the first time. Some of them have married. Some of them have passed away. We have shared life's journey intimately and deeply with a small group of people around us, and it has been the most wonderful, enriching experience for us. Today, I want to talk to you about the power of small groups in your church to impact lives for Jesus, to impact lives so that people change the way they're operating, so that people grow to be more like Jesus. You have an enormous opportunity with the power of small groups in your church. I'm going to share with you a few statistics. Basically, we've looked at a lot of research. We've looked at research that's been done by people like the Bureau of Statistics, people like McCrindle, people like the National Church Life Survey. We've also read a lot of the qualitative research. In fact, we've probably read most of the books that have been written on small groups over the years. And what I want to present to you is some really interesting findings that show you what the power of small groups are for your church to really change people's lives. One question we've asked people is, why did you leave your previous congregation? So have a think about people that have left your church in the last 1 or 2, 3 years. And what we found is a very common reason why people leave a church. The key reason 70% of people leave a church is because they move. They move out of your geographic area. There's probably not a lot you can do about it. Key reason people leave a church is because they move. One thing that does come to mind, you may want to think about, well, if people are moving out of our area, others are moving in. What might be our outreach to people moving in? But the key reason most people leave a church is because they move. The next most significant reason a person will leave your church, or the thing that people leave your church have in common, is that their only contact with your church is on a Sunday. So if you wanted to be predictive about which people may leave your church this year, you would look very carefully at people whose only contact with you is on a Sunday. We know that for people to stay and be part of a church and to grow in their faith, that multiplicity of contact points is very important. And small groups are an amazing way where you can have more contact with people in your church. Why did we focus on small groups? Basically, there's a lot of biblical reasons why we think about small groups. Paul records in Acts, and day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their houses, they received their food with glad and generous hearts. We also see the writer to the Hebrews saying, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together. There are a lot of biblical reasons why we want to meet together in small groups. I'm using the term small groups. You may have other words for small groups that you use. They're interchangeable. Some churches will call them growth groups. Some will call them small groups, gospel groups, Bible study groups, nurture groups, care and share groups, community groups, cell groups, connect groups, whatever you call them. Today we're talking about small groups. Now, what we know is that small groups really impact a person's faith. We know that 63% of people who regularly attend a small group look for opportunities to share their faith. This compares to 22% of people who are not in a small group. What this means is that if someone is in a small group in your church, they're 3 times as likely to be looking for opportunities to share their faith. This is a significant impact that small groups have on people. We also know that for people who are in a small group, for churchgoers who are part of a small group, they're 79% more likely to be a weekly attender at your church. They're 74% more likely to say they understand the Bible better. They're 69% more likely to say they feel closer to God. And they're 66% more likely to say they trust God more. Basically, small groups have a huge impact on the lives of the members of your church. We know that probably a large portion of your church is already in a small group, and being part of a small group really impacts the faith of the members of your church. We also know that small group leaders are looking for more direction. So we want to encourage you to be thinking about how the small groups in your church can be as healthy as they possibly can be. We want you to be in a situation where you have a clear and common purpose for the small groups in your church. We want you to prioritize the role of small groups in your church. And we want you to celebrate the small groups in your church for the impact they're having on your church members' faith. So, question for you. Does your small group ministry of your church have a clear and common purpose? For many churches, they'll look at their small groups having a threefold purpose, or they'll draw it as a triangle. They'll see one part of the purpose of a small group is to help people mature in their discipleship, to help people grow as a disciple of Jesus. The second aspect of the small group will be for the small group to be a loving community that supports each other as their life unfolds throughout the years and the decades. And a third key reason or key point for your small groups is for them to be helping each other, equip each other to be outward looking, to look for opportunities to share their faith, look for opportunities to engage people, sometimes for the first time, with Jesus. What is one key habit that leads to spiritual growth? There are many habits that lead to spiritual growth. Probably the one key habit that leads to spiritual growth is reading the Bible regularly and personally. And small groups are a wonderful way for your members to read the Bible with each other and to encourage each other in their own personal reading of the Bible. We want you to have a small group ministry in your church that provides consistency for people to engage with their faith, that provides care for each other so that they will look out for each other, and that will encourage each other to contribute their gifts to the life of the church and to contribute their gifts to growing other people in their faith. We want you to look at how you equip, your small groups equip the individual members to share their faith. One thing that will often happen in small groups is that they'll help each other with the stories that they tell, that helps them engage in faith with their friends and contacts. We want you to have small groups that are encouraging to invite other people to engage with their church. Sometimes the way people will engage with your church is initially through a small group, through the personal contact of someone. We want your small groups to be things that help your church engage with new members of your church really well. It's great that when a new person expresses an interest in being part of your church, you can be able to say there's a small group that we would love you to belong to. You may want to think about what is the attendance of your small groups compared to your Sunday services. This is based on research. Basically, what we find is that churches that have a very effective and vibrant small group ministry will find that their small group attendance is roughly 70% of the number of people who come on a Sunday. So for a church with a healthy and vibrant small group ministry, if they have 100 people worshiping on a Sunday, we'll find that about 70 of them are regularly part of a small group. That's just a benchmark where you can place how your church is travelling at the moment. if it's less than 70%, you might want to be really thinking about what is it that we can do that will encourage more people to engage with a small group. We also want you to think about how you communicate the ministry of small groups to the wider church. Do you communicate them on a Sunday as something that's really, really important for your church members to do? Or is it just something you say, this is nice to do, be part of a small group if you want to? Some churches actually go as far as saying we see small group attendance almost on the same level as attending on a Sunday. If you want to come and be part of our church, we expect you'll be part of a small group of our church, because they know what the impact of a small group is going to have on that church member's faith. The other thing we want you to see is a clear connection between the vision and mission of your church and the role of small groups. Many churches at the moment are reworking their vision and mission, and we want to see churches having a very clear understanding of where small groups fit in the vision and mission of their church. When we asked, how could small groups be more effective? This is what people told us. 75% of small group leaders said, we actually would like more direction from the church when it comes to leading our group. So what that means is most of your small group leaders are probably wanting your church to be a little more directive, a little more out there being helpful with how they can lead their small group. One researcher said, the small group ministry in a church rises and falls on the quality of its leaders. This means an issue for you to think about is how you train and equip the leaders of your small group. The choice and the accountability that you have of your small group leaders is critically important to the ministry of your church. You should be looking for people who will lead your church who tick a big box in the column called character. We want you to be looking at the character of the people who lead your small group. We also want you to be looking at the competence of the people leading your small group. And for most churches, you'll find that there are things you can do that will help build the competence of your small group leaders. This is a really important thing for churches to be doing. And we're also wanting you to have small group leaders who are really convicted that this is the place God wants them to be, and that they're serving Jesus and serving your church through their role as a leader of a small group in your church. One researcher said basically, if you take care of your group leaders, they will take care of your small group system. What this is saying again is the importance of you training and equipping well the leaders of your small group. We know from our research that the small group leaders are asking for it, more input, more training, and we want churches to really take this on board and look at ways you can equip them to be better leaders of the group, particularly aligning the ministry of your small group with the vision and mission of your church. So, a critical question your church needs to ask about your small group leadership is, who are you going to select to lead? Another question you might want to ask is, how are you going to train your small group leaders? Another question is, what is the content that should shape the training that you're going to give to your small group leaders? And a fourth question you might want to ask is, how are you going to care for and support and build up and nourish and mentor the current leaders you have of your small groups? Final question you might want to ask is, how are your small group leaders seen in the life of your church? Are they seen as important leaders in your church? Because the ministry your small group leaders are undertaking is very, very important to the impact that your church has on the lives of people and how Jesus is going to impact their lives in an ongoing way. So you may want to think about how you're going to identify and recruit and develop future leaders for your small group ministry. Some of the things that are quite negotiable. the type of group, it's very negotiable. The way they gather, it's very negotiable. The curriculum that they look at, it's very negotiable. Some of the things churches will have in common, some will say we'll form our small groups around common interests. Others will say it's more of a free market thing where everyone chooses which group they want to be part of. Some groups will be gender-based, some will be based on demography or geography, some will be based around whether you're single or married, some will be based around generational or intergenerational, some will be based around geography, other churches will base it around ethnicity. So, choices you have. You self-select which group you want to be in, or do you organise the placement of members? The frequency with which you meet, that's another choice. My personal experience is our small group meets weekly, and we think that's been enormously beneficial. Because of the frequency of contact, it means we are up to date with what's happening with people's lives. At a minimum, I suggest you want to be meeting fortnightly. If you go for anything less than fortnightly, you start finding that if someone misses a meeting, a month or two can pass before you meet each other. We've also found that a meal is a big, helpful thing with a small group. It's often a challenging thing, providing a meal or working out meal rosters, but there's something about eating together that's very, very special in a Christian context. Can I encourage you, where it's possible, to incorporate a meal with your small group? It may not be something you do every time, but you should be looking for opportunities to share meals together. We hope your church leadership is really supporting the small group ministry of your church. Many of church leaders do this by the pastor or the minister will occasionally visit a small group to see how they're travelling. Other churches now are doing things like very simple spiritual growth surveys. So they're getting an understanding of where their church is in regards to the individual's spiritual growth. And they're able to tinker with things once they understand, are people growing in their faith or not? You might want to measure how many new groups that you've started for the year. You might want to have a look at what percentage of your church is in a small group. All of these will give you some idea of what the potential is for you to upgrade and improve your small group ministry. We also want to encourage you to celebrate the ministry of your small groups. Look for sharing of stories amongst your congregation of what's been happening in small groups. Incorporate it into sermons or announcements. Find ways of encouraging people about the importance of small group in the ministry of the church. You might want to set a goal or think about what leaders you're training for small groups. Also, you might want to think about what you're doing to show appreciation for your small group leaders. Your small group leaders are undoubtedly going to be volunteers. How are you going to reward and recognise them for the significant contribution they're making to the life of your church and the impact your church is having for Jesus on the individual people who are part of your church? So we see there is a key opportunity for churches to do their small group ministry better. We know that a really effective small group ministry can have an enormous impact on the individual's faith. We want you to have groups that have a clear and common purpose. And for a lot of churches, you'll find that the clear and common purpose of your small group will have some of these elements. Some of the common elements will be around maturing people as disciples. Another common element will be providing support and care for each other member in the group. And another common element will be helping your church members to be outward looking in their own personal ministry and how they go about sharing their faith with other people in their lives. We want you to prioritise the ministry of small groups. We want you to be making it clear to your whole church that small groups are a really important part of the ministry of your church. And we want to encourage you to celebrate the good things that happen in your church as a result of your small group ministry. So, I hope today I've been able to really encourage you about the impact small groups can have on the lives of people in your church. I know from my own personal example, for Alison and I for 35 years, one of the most significant things we've ever done with our faith is to be part of a small group, to take it seriously, to share our lives intimately and closely, to share our spiritual journey, to share the joys and occasional frustrations of our life with people that are close enough to understand us, who we can trust, who will support us, and who we will support. We want that to be the experience of every member of your church, that small groups are a really helpful and stunning way that help people engage with their faith, mature as disciples, and care for each other and look for ways to share the good news about Jesus. It's been great to be with you.